Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This afternoon I'm looking at a book on homicide. It's called Making Sense of Homicide, a student textbook. I didn't have this book when I was studying criminal law in 1970. I wish I had in some ways. Certainly when I was doing the LLB at that particular time, it's over 50 years ago now, the law was really quite different, and certainly studying criminal law was rather different. This book has been written anyway by a number of expert people: Adam Lynes, Elizabeth Yardley and Lucas Danos. There's a special contribution from Ronald Winch, who'll be known to many of you, and there's a foreword from David Wilson, which is worth reading. Waterside Press have published this work. They're a publishing house putting justice into words. They've certainly done so here, and I'm very grateful for this book, which I think helps give you an understanding about homicide. Therefore, the title I've given the book review is a useful commentary on the widely misunderstood criminology of homicide. Now, I say that because if you look at the television listings, there are a very large number of programmes about murder, death. And so therefore, it's an issue which is around all of the time. So this subject is of interest to a great many people, not just students, but a whole range of other people. Let's look at the book first of all. It's a paperback, a bit dusty on the back there. Paperback, you see the front, there's the spine, and then you can see the back. You probably can't really make out much on the back, but there are a few little comments. The back of the book, there are some, again, very substantial books from Waterside. Then you've got the index. It's by page numbering at the back. It's quite a good index, actually. It's got quite a lot in it. A lot of people mentioned, of course, as I say. And then after that, you've got the actual book itself. And you've got, with each of the chapters, you've got a little sort of references for basically for bibliography at the back of each chapter. The last chapter being a conclusions chapter. There's the front of the book there, the blurb there, and then there's the information about the former police superintendent Ronald Winch giving a special contribution. Beginning to read that, and also Professor David Wilson. That's the table of contents running through, talking about the various homicide types of homicide. And then coming up, chapter 11, conclusions. It's quite useful. As I say, it's an easy book to read. It's 300 pages. It's not a long book. There's the bibliography of the authors. And then you've got some acknowledgements there. Again, various people who are involved. Then there's a foreword, which is well worth reading, as I say, from Professor Wilson. And then you get into what is homicide. And then you run all the way through with that. And then, of course, at the end you have the conclusion, bringing this textbook to a close. Now, I thought the book was really very interesting to read for a lot of reasons, because we all have probably our own opinions about homicide and the various aspects of it. And, of course, you do look in this country, we've had a number of approaches at perhaps reforming the law, none of which has really come about to change that much. Obviously there was an attempt to try and bring in first and second degree murder and all that sort of stuff, but we still basically have the current legislation from the Act of Parliament going all the way back to the original common law offences. But death, of course, comes in many forms, and so for Waterside Press, who are putting justice into words, the subject matter presents a wide variety of views for students, legal practitioners and professionals alike. And of course, I think to the wider public who have a fascination, and have always had a fascination, with this particular area of substantive law within the criminal law. Now, Professor David Wilson, who gives an excellent foreword, says that the book digs deeper than most student textbooks, which of course it does, offering us a judicious and much needed collection when our existence is ever more enveloped by aspects of death, despair and homicide in all its various malignant forms. Strong stuff. That's on the first page of his foreword. And as we understand it, this is the first dedicated textbook for criminology students who are studying homicide. Now, I say that because I was referring to my studies in criminal law, not in criminology, as part of my law degree. But this book is really, I think, aimed more at the applied criminologist. Obviously, there's an element of pure criminology in that sense, but I think it's really applied criminology. And of course, the authors explain that criminal homicide is but one form of lethal violence which victims may suffer, leading them to describe a much broader range of scenarios. And of course, there's not just, as we see with all these programs, Murder, She Wrote, all these other programs that are on television, Diagnosis, Murder, all these other factual programs, Murder by the Sea. You see, the whole thing is there in its different forms, and that's the range of scenarios. Students, I think, will find the topics covered range very interesting, from murder itself to manslaughter to state killings, genocide, disasters involving victims of public policy, corporate crime, and, for instance, complete negligence in what happens and leading to death, and shortcomings in health and safety. So it does look at the whole ambit. Making Sense of Homicide, the book itself, gives us a comprehensive and robust overview of contemporary homicide studies, and I think that's helpful for the criminologist. It also aims to reposition a discussion of the topic for those wishing to see beyond routine media hype and ill-informed popular discourse. And of course, that's the problem with the television programme and the gutter press, the red top newspapers. The difficulty you've got is that they sensationalise these things. To be fair, they don't normally make too many mistakes. Sometimes they do. I think in one or two cases, the Yates murder in Bristol, where the Daily Mirror should be ashamed of themselves. But there were problems, and there have been problems with some of the nationals over the way they sometimes report cases. But as Professor Wilson rightly says, it does so, and this book does so, within perspectives of what he calls semiology, the political economy and critical understanding of violence from the ultra-realist perspective. It would be highly beneficial, I think, for those who are studying criminology to read this book. I mean, one of the points about reading criminology jurisprudence is you have to do quite a lot of reading, so you build up the picture. I mean, I did find teaching the subject that many people don't do very much reading at all. They just see the individual names and leave it at that. But if you actually read the books, that gives you an understanding of where you are, because the authors have most helpfully also included a special expert contribution from former police superintendent Ronald Winch, who is well known, I'm sure, to many of you. It's well worth reading because it sets out how the United Kingdom police investigate homicide, including fundamental requirements and pitfalls. And can I just say, generally, they are very good. There's a lot of criticism, because it's terribly easy to criticise, but I think, generally speaking, they do a very good job, because obviously it is to consider the most serious of crimes. The book covers, of course, serial killing, mass and spree homicides across the jurisdictions of the UK and the US and other countries. Also knitted in to this key resource are accurately observed accounts of the Holocaust, capital punishment and homicide within a consumer society. We found that it does not shirk the difficult subjects. These are not comfortable subjects for many people, but there's this morbid fascination with it, and it's not going to change. We are humans, and that's what we are actually interested in. The authors explain the categories within which homicide is conveniently discussed, as well as the crimes of the powerful and those made opaque for political, economic or other questionable purposes. In other words, they get away with it for various reasons. Making the work, I think, one of immense value to anybody who's actually studying this area and wishes to see the whole way in which we view violence through a new lens. It's a hugely wide-ranging explanation of homicide, which I welcome, and it's perfect for the dedicated courses, which I've certainly taught in the past, and I think it would be very useful for any student to read this. Let me conclude by saying that the most useful introduction from Professor Wilson should be read in detail before you go to the main text, because that sets the scene. The work demonstrates how homicide as a definition stems from political, cultural and social, societal, he calls it, choices, and looks at the deficits in homicide classifications. Again, we do need reviews of the way in which the criminal law works, both with offences against the person and with homicide itself. And I think at some stage this century we will have another Homicide Act and probably repeal of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861, with a view to how we will reclassify violence by one person against another. It's, I think, an entirely fresh look at the subject, which I found great and interesting because it gets the old mind thinking. So thank you, Waterside Press. You certainly do put justice into words. And thank you, Brian Gibson, for producing this book with your colleagues. The date of publication of this paperback is the 30th of November 2020. There's the book again. There's the front, the spine, and then the back. Just opening it in the middle, you've got some, it's an interesting one, this. Death at the hands of the state. You see the blocked areas. These are key points. This is actually a case study setting out what's happened with the case. This is the case of Eric Garner. He was an African-American man. It sets out what had happened in that particular case. Again, you can see in the back references to named people and obviously the various headings which are covered in the book itself. Genocide is also covered, which I think is extremely helpful because that is an area of international law which is still not really understood the way it should be. But we will have to grapple with that certainly as the decade unfolds. Thank you very much to Waterside Press and good reading. Bye-bye.